Welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. You are listening to a podcast by Pastor Eric Siepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. If you enjoy Faith Over Breakfast, we encourage you to rate it on the Apple Podcast app, on Spotify, or Google Play. Thank you and enjoy the podcast. Well, welcome to Faith Over Breakfast. My name is Eric Siepen, and I am pastor of the Village Church, and across from me is Andy Littleton, pastor of Mission Church. We both live in Tucson, Arizona. We live close to each other. Yep. Our churches are a little further apart in location, but we're just loving this podcast.
Yeah. And today, let's see, we did jump into Corey's listener question on AI briefly, and then we got a little bit into what's unique about our churches, the ways we teach, the ways our community the ways our community work, maybe, and why it's hard to find another church if you've liked it.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and I, halfway through the conversation, I was thinking, man, we're really bragging on our churches, but you know what? We love our churches.
We do,
and we're really proud of them, proud of what Jesus has done in the midst of them.
Yeah, absolutely. So, anyway, thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you guys. Check. Hey, Andy.
Oh, hey. How's it going?
Wow. Oh, you know what? See that button over there? We're echoing. Yeah.
Every time,
because I use it to check our volumes and stuff.
Okay. One of those deals. So you're over here using ChatGPT, and I'm telling you, this is old news.
Old news, yeah. ChatGPT.
All the podcasts have already all done it. Everybody's already just using ChatGPT for everything. I didn't even text you this morning.
ChatGPT texted me, told me what to do, how to do it.
Yeah.
Yes. I've noticed that even on occasion when I venture into the TikTok world, it believes that I only want to see TikToks on how to make my business or my podcast or my life better by using ChatGPT.
Yeah. Okay.
To build my website, to make myself millions of dollars.
Yeah, it'll work.
But we got a question from, we got a couple of our loyal listeners, Corey Gilchrist and Rick Drost have sent in questions. But the AI one's been on there for a while, so I think it's only fair that we at least give it a few moments of our time.
Okay. Well, let's do that. You know what? Just a quick note. I don't get the emails anymore because I think you changed the password. So, come on, man.
Oh, really?
Come on. Yeah.
I you know how I found the password?
I have no idea. Because I probably shouldn't be talking about this.
I didn't know the password. Yeah, we're going to tell everybody how we found it. I won't tell people the password. I didn't know the password either. So I looked up our conversation, and it's in there. That's the new password is in our conversation. That's how I found it. I didn't know what it was either.
Yeah.
So
I probably had it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well.
Yeah.
Who knows?
But I'll resend it to you.
Oh, thank you.
But anyway.
Okay.
Corey Gilchrist. So he asked some questions about. So here's what he said. I asked the artificial intelligence to describe the theology of the Christian Reformed Church, but in a funny way, and this is what I got.
Oh, I did see this.
I read this to you. We're not going to read it on air, but it gave a humorous description, but somewhat accurate.
Yeah, sure.
But people are using this AI to, write things or to do all that kind of stuff.
Did you know the AI is actually predicted in the Bible?
You mean it got destroyed in Joshua?
Yeah, dude, it got destroyed.
Yeah. They were way ahead of their time.
Yeah,
AI was. So
AI.
I just asked it to ask you some questions.
Yeah.
About AI. So here's its first question.
Perfect.
How do you see AI impacting the future of faith and religion, particularly in terms of spiritual practices and community engagement? This is a computer-generated question for you, Andy. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Thanks for asking, chat. I think it's going to change everything for the better. There will be no negative implications of this, and it's just going to be great.
Yeah, you need to be careful because it's listening, so we have to be really kind to it.
Exactly.
It'll get you.
We'll tell you this. Yeah, there will be a secret podcast This podcast is going to be so secret it won't be recorded.
So
how I really feel.
How you really feel. It's a secret podcast. So let me actually throw you something at you here, and you kind of respond to it. So, little self-disclosure. I spent 7 years in college, and one of the reasons I struggled severely with in college is that I have a writing learning disability, which affects the way my ability to construct sentences and to write out my thoughts in a way that I feel like these are my thoughts. Right. So it was really hard. Took a lot of tutoring. I read a paper recently that I'd written maybe in my 6th year of college, which was really good. And I was like, wow, I had gotten to a place where I could write, but it was a practice I had to really work on. Yeah. And as soon as I let go of it, in an academic way, I lost a lot of it. So what's been interesting about ChatGPT for me personally is that I can bang in an outline, put in all my thoughts, but they don't have to be, say, cohesive and then I can let the chat machine, the AI, write it out for me. Yeah. And then I can begin to edit it and have it rewrite it and do stuff for me. And so for me, what's been really very interesting is just having this opportunity to work with language in a way I'd never been able to do in any way that was satisfying to myself.
No, that's cool.
But people are using this to write tons and tons of copy, which I don't know how I feel about that. But for me, as somebody with a learning disability,
well, as with every technology, it's not an evil. It's got ups and downs. There's actually a really good podcast by Device and Virtue, I think, recently that thought through the implications of this, of ChatGPT and faith, and did a really deep dive. They're much more technology minded than I am. That was really good. So if anybody wants to check that out, Device and Virtue, I like it a lot. Then I would say, things like that. A buddy of mine and I were playing around with it, and something we put in there was, we asked it to write articles of incorporation for a nonprofit. We put a lot of details in there. It does this, this, and this. It's governed by a board of 5 people, so on and so forth. And it did an excellent job with those. And so something like that, which is also really cost prohibitive for smaller nonprofits or businesses or whatever, it could have a lot of value in drawing from kind of the sources of the internet to do that really well, where you don't have to go, hire an expert that only a person who can afford that could do. So that was impressive. I think that a lot of the personal writing style, I was thinking about it as an editor almost. Like if you wrote something and put it in and just asked it to edit it, and then went in and made sure it preserved your voice or something, that could be really useful. So there's a lot of uses. I think it's important to note that probably the future of something like ChatGPT is more that it would replace Google or something, because in like a search engine, you start from square one. You make a search, it gives you all these sources. You have to go in and find your information. ChatGPT collects and combines all of the information for you. Yes. And
like a personal assistant of sorts.
Yeah, and you can refine the search and broaden it, and it just keeps kind of refining it. And so those who are nervous or more in the search engine world, that this is a pretty powerful tool that could replace what they do. And if you think about it that way, that is actually a really cool tool. The difference is right now you don't really know where those sources are, and there's definite potential for a couple things. There's potential that you will not understand your own sources, and number 2, that it will actually give you a prejudiced answer because it's only giving you an answer from what's like most widely available on the web, and so there are certain built-in prejudices because of that, and you won't be able to track that down.
Well, and here, so I have used ChatGPT in sermon prep in the sense that what was really interesting, I did a couple experiments with Greek words that I knew a lot about. Yeah. And so I would ask it to kind of give me a breakdown of that word historically. Yeah. It does a much better job. Yeah. then I could. Well, it takes what I would be doing in say, an hour,
sure,
and
just collects it very quickly. Yep.
It made some mistakes, and so then I would say, hey, that's not right. Actually, this is more with, and the AI would say, oh yeah, you're right, and then it would change its thing and correct it. So it was very interesting. So, and partly you have. At this point in time, at least, you're right. You have to be very careful as to where it's pulling from and what it's saying and how it's interpreting data.
Well, and for example, with the prejudice, so Corey put in the history of the Christian Reformed Church. From whose perspective, though?
Right.
Was it from the South Africans' perspective?
Right.
But, it doesn't tell you whose perspective it's drawing from. And
unless you tell it.
Unless you tell it to. And that's exactly right. But if you wouldn't think to tell it, if you would just think this is an unbiased answer, that's not true. It's drawing from probably I don't know the answer to this, but it's drawing from the most prevalent sources or the most...
Yeah, I think...
whatever.
It's drawing from the internet, but it's... I think the last 2 or 3 years are not included.
Well, okay, but the last 2 or 3 years, and I would assume you're getting. I mean, there's a lot on the internet.
Oh,
yeah,
there's a ton,
obviously. So
right, and I mean, the thing is that you're actually. I think I tried this out. You're prevalent enough of an author on the internet prior to 2021. There's enough of your stuff that I can get it to write in your style. Not well, but it does sound a little bit like Andy Littleton because it'll use some of your words. It just pulls out random verb uses and stuff like that.
That stuff is happening, and there's some AI around voice and images, of course.
Yeah, and that's very different. Yes.
Yep. But you can get it to generate your voice pretty well in other systems.
Yes.
Your voice. I know that's very different, but
yeah.
There's a lot of cool stuff out there with it. There's also obviously some real problems that it will cause.
And if you even just go back a little bit and thinking about all of this, I mean, you and I started doing a radio program, and podcasting actually when we started was out there, but it hadn't taken the world by storm yet when we started podcasting 4 or 5 years ago. I mean, it was there, but not like it's there now.
Sure.
I mean, there weren't huge big names in podcasting. Yeah. It was starting to be that way.
What are you talking about? We were there. We
were the big names. Yeah, we were. But we're using it's just a technology that it allows you and I in this little churches to put our voice out there. It's using technology.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have a podcast about what's the impact of podcasts on faith, right? I mean, that's and it has a big impact,
big time. Yeah. I was just last night. I plopped on my couch and read a chapter of one of Wendell Berry's essays on futurists from the 70s. He wrote it in the 70s. And he was talking about some prediction that our lives would be lived on screens and we would be in video meetings with people from all over the world and all this stuff. And I was like, oh, shit, yeah, that's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah.
And he was critiquing that future. Not that he said it wasn't going to happen, but he was talking about the satisfaction that we might glean from our day in such a world. And that made me, well, I understood what he was saying. I've even thought about the sabbatical I'm going to take. And one of the things I really want to do, I was thinking about it in the way I thought I want to have space from kind of needing to engage people. But the truth is, maybe I actually don't really want to be on my computer and stuff. And I worry about what does it look like to be like months, like what kind of hole am I going to get in my email or
right.
I don't even know how to do that. But I just want to make something for a while.
That's cool.
And so there is that the more tech that takes over elements of our lives, I think we're going to kind of struggle with that. There is a satisfaction that comes from doing something with other humans in the room and making something that is real. Or he was talking about taking care of an animal.
Yeah.
He described his day of just taking care of the horses. And he was kind of saying, this level of satisfaction can only be had in the real and tactile world.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I think the visual part of things, the animated part of things, it's different than the printed word, or even the short form printed word on the internet. But like that has a whole different impact on our brain chemistry than picking up a book and having a long read with a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, and then going out and taking care of your horses.
Right.
It's a different experience chemically in your brain, and I think, yeah, where we're at is I don't know if we can sustain it.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't seem good. Just the people I know and walk with in church, it feels like there's a lot of brokenness and a lot of problems, and a lot of it seems to correspond with kind of where, if you live life in an embodied way, or if you live life in a mostly, I don't know, what's the word? I don't know, tech-centered way. Anywho.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's kind of that's our shot at AI. I'm not as worried about it as others are. I think it's an inevitable flood, and we're not going to be able to stop it.
It was destroyed in the Bible once, and it came back.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I'll put the Bible reference in the notes so you know what we're talking about.
You really should.
I
okay.
Will. I will. So
there was that question and another one?
Another one, and I think I'll read the other one at the end, and because it's going to take some prep. It's a serious conversation for you and I, who say we don't prep, but this one we should at least have some thought about before
this,
we
this
just
one
open
must
our
be
mouths.
Coming from Rick.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, I got to meet Rick.
You met him
over at my little book signing.
Did he come? Oh, yeah. That's so cool. That is so cool.
So I got to meet Rick.
Oh,
That's great.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
See how it works, people. You can interact like Rick Drost with Faith Over Breakfast, with Andy as an author. This is just good stuff.
Incredible.
So share Faith Over Breakfast with everybody.
The world.
Yes.
Hey, type it into the AI constantly so that they can't help. The AI will just share it.
Yeah. Write AI-generated articles and post them on blogs about Faith Over Breakfast.
There you go.
Just do it. Do it everywhere.
That's it.
Every review you put on Amazon, just stick in the bottom. And also, you should listen to Faith Over Breakfast.
Yeah. Okay, so
let's
we're
go
gonna
to
read.
We'll read it at the end, and then as a good preview for the next.
A good preview. Yeah. What did I text you, Eric? That was a long time ago. I sent.
Well, here's the text that you sent me, and I think it's one that makes for an interesting conversation, and I wouldn't mind feedback from people on this. So basically, what you were saying is many people who experience Mission Church, and you said, and I assume the Village, and then when they leave. For some reason, maybe they move to another place. Yeah. They struggle to find another church because it just doesn't have the same experience.
Yeah, there's.
So one of the comments I used to get a lot of time, and this is from the people who'd come to the Village, and this is mostly Christians, but they would come to the Village, and their first thing would be like, I love the Village, but I can't handle the worship music.
Right.
And then 3 years later, they would come back to me and say, I went to another church, and I don't think I can ever go to another church because the music is so terrible. I can't do this. I can't do the whole thing. I just can't do it anymore. Like the Village has ruined me for other churches. Yeah. Yeah. So this is a comment I would get a lot, actually. Yeah. From people who had to leave to move or whatever.
And I do hear that our music is a very different experience. People
and they're more familiar because you guys do sing songs from the larger catalog.
Some, yeah. And we don't tend to get I can't stand it quite to the level that you guys do. And I understand that feeling because I've visited the Village and they're unfamiliar songs and they're a little garage bandy and it's just very different in my experience. But I could also see it's clear in the community how beloved they are, and I could see myself entering into that and getting to that point. Our church doesn't strike you quite the same. There are usually, I would assume, a number of songs visitors don't know as well, but they are a little more in the catalog. Mike's approach to doing worship is very unique, I would say. It's not anything like crazy different, but it's just he's a production level musician who really and he doesn't worship lead with this. He's not like the pumped up worship leader. He's subtle, but you're also getting the quality that you might expect at a show. And that's a unique combination. So I think that has an effect. I hear that too, the music. But I also tend to hear more about the openness that there is to conversation, the diversity of people, the level of ability to process your faith. And people go to other churches and go, "Oh my gosh." And it's exactly what you described. Moving to another state, there's a transfer of work or going to be back with family or whatever it is.
Right.
And I had a conversation yesterday, great conversation, but that was exactly it. But it's one that I've had many times. People move and they will call, and often they're saying, "Can you help me find a church that's more like Mission?"
I get that a lot too.
Yeah. I figured you might. And honestly, it's hard to do. I don't, one lady at our church, I think she tried a lot of church. She moved to a smaller town, and realized like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm going to ever find one. I'm going to have to be very uncomfortable wherever I go.
Yeah. Well, and I've spent a lot of time calling pastors in other states and interviewing them and doing Google searches and then looking at the church websites and trying to gauge figure values.
What are they saying here? Yeah. What do they mean?
Yeah.
So what's the reality going to be when you show up?
Yes. There's a lot of that. I think, Mission Church and the Village are unique in their expressions. And I think they're unique because you in particular, though there are other people involved, and me in particular, pay a lot of attention to the details. We have a particular vision and we have a particular set of values,
right?
And we want those things to be we want them to be integrated in everything we do, and we really work hard to do that. And we then also, I think, at least my observation of you, and I know it is of me, we want it then to be self-sustaining and self-propelling. So we need to get people fully on board in that. But instead of saying, I think the other thing is unique, instead of saying you then have to conform when you're inviting people in, you say, here's this system. Now I want you to come in and I want all of who you are as a person in Christ and a leader to like permeate this and begin to create and paint and make something. And so I think that is a very attractive place to be and a very safe place and welcoming place to be when you come when you're looking for a church. You end up feeling very cared about and very thought about. And the other thing is, honestly, yes, more churches have been eating together after service, but both churches have been doing this since, the beginning of time. Like food is a big part of it. Like it's part of our value system and communal conversation around food and activity around food. And not the kind of food like where you roll up the cart and have some cookies and milk and donuts after. No, it's like these are sit-down meals prepared by somebody for you, or a community preparing it together. And so that's powerful. Just that in itself is makes...
It changes everything. I always think about the end of the day for us, the evening of sitting on the patio with food, talking to people. That's such an incredibly unique part of it. To me, it shouldn't be. That is not that novel of an idea. It's just what people do. But every time I experience it, I think this is one of the best things we do here. And when I go to other churches and there isn't one, and my daughter has mentioned that when we leave, she goes, "It's really weird to just have the service and go. This is strange."
Right.
To her, all the other churches are weird. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's
they just kind of put on a show and you go.
My kids hate any time that I take vacation, especially when they were younger, because they don't want to go to other churches.
Yeah.
They don't like them. They feel foreign to them.
Yeah.
I think it's a good thing, but at the same time, it's a hard thing because when I look at, now our church is 20 some years old, and what we found is that, more and more people just decided to move back and live their life around the village. Or the kids start coming back because they're just like, there's not a place to go. And how we created such a foreign way that it's almost, church has become a second language in a sense instead of their primary language. So you go to another church and they understand what's being said. It's in English in a sense. It's in the evangelical culture, so they get it, but it's not their language. Yeah, it's like they use a whole different set of words, or they mean something different when they use that word. Yeah. And so that's I don't know.
No, for sure. There are ups and downs because you go, well, what happens when some of you grow up and move or need to, or you die and the village isn't quite the same or whatever. Right. Then what? And but at the same time, and this kind of leads into the first part of that question, or what I was going to say, is I think it's really critical that the church breaks out of the monotony that does exist. And so that comes to some of the topics that we've covered. So something that I heard last week, and I've heard many times, I heard it a lot last week, was around this idea of what the end vision of it all is. And I continue to be surprised because I've been in reformed streams of theology for some time, and I'm used to hearing about the new heavens and new earth. I'm very influenced by Tim Keller and by osmosis, those who influenced him. So I've been thinking and hearing about that for a while now, but I didn't grow up with it. But something I hear over and over is people will say one of the biggest shifts that they're still in the midst of from coming to mission is this idea that it usually is around, in a way, the way we speak about eschatology, even though it's subtle. Eschatology being the study of the end of things, end of the age, and around heaven, or the new heavens and new earth. And over and over, I will hear people say, this is like, I'm wrestling with that. This is new. I'm adjusting to it. But it's also one of the things that has been where people have said, this is way more compelling. This is changing things for me. And I know that's not the only belief. Those are just ones I hear about a lot.
Sure.
But there are a lot of things. I think if you came to the village, there especially would be things around how your anxieties would be engaged. And so, like, that's something that stood out to me. That the things that were going on within my heart and mind, you're talking about them all the time. I'm not used to hearing those in church. I didn't hear them much at all growing up.
Yeah. I would say, since I was so heavily influenced early on by N.T. Wright, that the foundation for New Heavens and New Earth got laid really early.
That would be another,
I think what is surprising to people, and I hear over and over again, especially from Christians who show up to the village and really anchor in, is like, I've never heard of this priesthood of believers in the way that you think about it.
The idea that, that all, the calling, the missionary calling is to us all. Yeah. And the calling to lead one another in worship.
And to be pastors, so to speak, to one another. Yeah. It's just mind blowing to people. Yeah. And it really is an adjustment for them.
So then I was having a conversation yesterday about this too, where I said, the thing about, say teaching around the new heavens and new earth and not speaking so much about heaven as an ethereal escape, and that changes the way you talk about the judgment of the earth and what that looks like. Right. I was saying, I realize that those teachings are things that have led to us being rejected as a church too. People have come and heard that and gone, nope, for sure. Like, I know that. Or the accumulation of several of those teachings, people go, I don't like this. Like the eschatology teaching, they go, you don't even think that this current war in Ukraine is part of the end times. And I'll go, well, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how. Don't think we're supposed to. I'm not going to preach on it. And they'll be surprised or something. And it actually kind of isolates us in the Christian community, probably a number of these teachings. But I've also seen how important it is for people who've found that and gone, thank you. This other stuff didn't feel right.
Right.
And it makes you a niche or like a niche community, right? Not mainstream, and that's hard. But I also think it's deeply important. Like, we need churches that speak about these things differently. I think it's critical. Right. And so I've struggled with embracing that niche role and being the leader of that niche that doesn't fit everywhere within the church, but still wants to belong to it.
Right.
And how about you?
Well, I mean, I think part of what you're experiencing too, and on a larger scale, is how there are two very definitive streams, right? An Arminian and a Calvinist stream.
Those are two streams.
Yeah. I mean, and they... And there are many others, but what I would argue is that Calvinists, in particular Presbyterian, churches and Christian Reform and all those lovely people, they do also end up with that stigma, right?
Yeah.
Because some of that theology is fed from the new heavens, new earth, like God coming down. Now my time is with man, like. Not the destruction and escape to heaven and everything will be blissful, but like that this is an embodied resurrection and an embodied world,
which changes the way that you interact within the world because you expect it to go on in some way to some degree,
right? And the idea that it's not all wiped out, but it is all renewed,
and
made new,
made new.
And so that does put you in this weird place in dealing with what I would just the easy pop culture version of like the Left Behind theology that is more escapist theology and what I would call like a prophetic dissection obsession. So you're going to continually look at the events that are happening in the world and then try to figure out when God's coming back and where God's judgment is. And so it becomes the focus of your entire faith really is kind of monitoring the news, monitoring events, monitoring
and that's so prevalent. I was highly influenced by that, and I'm hearing from people in my church that honestly I've even been a little surprised by it. I was like, oh, you don't come across as having come from that tradition, but they were deeply influenced by it.
Yeah.
The biggest movie night we ever had at our church is when we showed Left Behind. We did, which I highly recommend to missional churches, by the way, because there were so many people who were affected or who had heard of that movie, but never, people outside the church were like, I've heard of this, but I've never actually seen it. Or Christians in the church were like, this movie terrified me. And to watch it and then actually unpack and discuss and go, that was a very unique view.
Yes.
Actually, we don't even hold it. But what about it could be good? What about it could be problematic? We had an amazing conversation about that.
Yeah, no, that sounds really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it does put you in that space. And I think God doesn't have a problem with the diversity of his body. I think it's good. I just think that it's hard sometimes. I actually think you have to teach your community how to be gracious to the larger body, because you are, in a sense, you've become the pinky toe of faith in a way.
And you're critiquing them. Uh-huh. So it has to be coupled with love.
Yeah.
That's
a big
tough
part of
to
it.
do. Yeah.
But I also think the church has bought a very consumerist kind of value system, and it has bought a very packaged Christianity.
Yeah.
And so the village, sure, there are things that are packaged and mission, but it is a much more organic faith. And so my experience is that people who come to the village in particular, once they're in, become very serious about the disciplines they're practicing, the faith they're practicing, the neighborhood they're in. And actually their view becomes very narrow in a sense. It's about their faith, about their family, about their neighborhood, and really engaging that for Jesus. Or walking through the harder things that they've been avoiding for a very long time.
I think that's a big theme at the Village.
Yeah.
It's there at Mission, but not as strong of a theme. Just that's our backgrounds coming out, right, as leaders. Yeah.
So I think that makes it hard. And so here's one of the things that happened to me on Sunday. We're talking about these things is a woman who I respect and I would consider like a second mom in my life came up to me and she said, we need to get your table of decision out of the Village and into the larger community. She said, I keep teaching people it. And she's like, I've been in this bubble. They've been there for about 5 years. And they said, I've been in this bubble for 5 years of the Village. And I step out into other churches and I'm appalled at what they're doing. I'm appalled at not in like, oh, this is terrible. Like there's just no depth and no understanding how the gospel permeates their life. And there's no gospel practice. And so they're just, they're kind of just being tossed to and fro in their internal life and their relationship with God. And so I was like, yeah, well, we got to do that. So we're in the process of it. But that I hear all the time.
Yeah.
It's not just one time from one person. So it's, but it's kind of like, I don't know what to do about that. I don't know the Village, long before Mission Church, was the critique of many things in Tucson when it comes to church and that kind of thing. And,
man, I mean, it's true. So I was thinking about, I have sabbatical time this year and I'm debating exactly how to use it. That's when I was talking about building, focusing on something like that. But I was thinking about going to church, and this is not all fleshed out with my family, so don't, assume that it is. But I was thinking about where, like, do we just go to Mission, just kind of stay in that practice? It sounds kind of nice in a way, honestly. It's a lot easier. And then I just thought, where else could I go? And the hard part, there's a lot about visiting churches that's weird. Like, I think if we started going to visit different churches, we would be having to engage with all these new people every time, and people would think we were checking out the church, or they wouldn't. I don't know, if the church is big enough or whatever. And it sounds kind of disconnected, and I don't really like that. And then I thought to myself, if I were to just go to one and attend the whole time, which one would it be? And I thought, well, the Village. Because number one, I could come in and tell all of you as leaders, hey, I'm just spending my sabbatical here. You'd understand. I think you'd respect that.
Yeah.
And that'd be fine. Number two,
I'd say don't talk to the guy in the corner. Leave him alone.
Yeah, leave him alone. And number two, I think it would be a meaningful time.
Sure.
Where I honestly struggle to think that would be true, as true going elsewhere. There are churches I love. I love people there, but that it would actually be impactful time.
Sure.
I really struggle to believe that it would be.
Right.
And so I get it. Like I have been, the curse is on me. I can't go anywhere else, right? Like, right. And I think about Mission, and I just go, man, I love it here. What would I do if I felt the sense we had to move? Or
right,
something? Like, I don't know where I would go.
Yeah,
so I really feel it.
So I think my little pushback on all of that would be, since I've done a number of sabbaticals, one of the great disciplines I found is to go sit under something that is different.
Yeah.
Or something where I've had some of my own baggage in.
Yeah.
And really kind of wrestle through that with God and say, okay, God, like I want to hear you in this thing, even though it's not my language and it's not my space. So that's been one thing that I've really enjoyed. And I have insisted until my children obviously are now 21 and 17, they make their own choices about church. But when they were little, I wanted them to experience it and taste it and have a conversation about it because they needed to be able to move through that. The other thing, though, is, you know what I tell everybody who goes to another place and is having a hard time finding a church? I'm like, go to a church that has, okay theology, like Orthodox church, in the sense, not the denomination or the community of the Orthodox, but just in Orthodoxy. And you know what? Create the Village there.
And invest in it. Yeah. Yep.
Invite people to your home and feed them and talk with the way the villager talks to them and care about them.
Yeah.
And you know what? You'll see a change.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. And how much of the village and mission are a product of people who came who just invested in it, right?
Yeah.
And it does make a church.
Yeah.
Like our mission and the village are absolutely not just you and I.
Right.
I mean, we have a big influence in them, but it's not. It's the people. Yeah.
And I mean, I think one of the things I think about the village and Mission Church is that we are sort of the food trucks of the church. I mean, maybe someday we'll open a brick and mortar store, but in a sense, we're always going to be the food truck. We're not going to be huge because the mission of both of the communities is community.
Right.
And so we're going to hive off what you've already done, or we're going to move to basically two different churches in a sense in one building like the village is. We're gonna because we want to hold on to the communal experience and what it does when we break bread together. And you just can't do that with 700 to 3,000 people on a Sunday.
Right.
And have that same experience.
Right.
And so I think, but your food trucks are unique too. They have such a personal flavor to the cook behind the thing.
No, it's true. I actually think the metaphor breaks down because we both literally own actual brick and mortar structures. And so we used to be nomadic churches. And then now
or maybe we move, we're that brick and mortar.
We're that brick and mortar that just has one location in town. Yeah.
But we used to be food trucks, and we hold on to that in a lot of ways, I think.
Right.
That flavor.
Exactly. Yeah, the brick and mortar that used to be a food truck, and you'll still meet the owner-operator when you're there. We're more like that. Yeah. Well, hey, I think that was...
Yeah, this is a fun conversation.
Yeah. Thanks for having it.
Yeah, and Corey Gilchrist, thank you for asking us about AI. I suppose we probably didn't sufficiently answer that question for you, but
I gave you another podcast you can go listen to. Yeah.
And I don't know if I'm really able to articulate too much about what AI is going to do to religion and faith. We'll have to wait and see.
Yep, we'll see. Well, hey, thanks for joining us. You can always email us questions at faithoverbreakfast@gmail.com. Rick will get to yours, I promise.
Yeah, and maybe, you know what, let me just pull up his email. And while I'm pulling that up, can I make just a pitch? One of the other podcasts I do is Healing the City podcast, which you can look up on Apple and Spotify. But I have been doing a series of interviews with my father.
Oh, yeah.
And
I've listened to one of them. Yeah.
They're very powerful, particularly the ones on vows and things. So if you were interested in just listening to a man who's in his 80s talk about counseling, about Vietnam, about just his relationship with Jesus, it's been really fun.
Yeah, I agree. I listened to the vows one. Excellent.
All right, so here's hi, Andy and Eric. I just finished reading Andy's book. It was very thought-provoking and historically informative. I loved it. Chapter 5 was especially interesting to me. For Andy's information, let me remind Eric that my 3 children are adopted and all 3 are racially diverse. Our oldest, Josh, is Native American. Our second son, Caleb, is African American. And our youngest daughter, and I'm gonna butcher her name, but it's Hadassah, Hadassah, is Hispanic. My desire is that each of my children would identify with Jesus in both their faith and their humanity. My son Caleb recently posted on Instagram a picture of white Jesus surrounded by children in various races, and the caption, "Look who is the only white man."
Yeah.
I would love to hear the two of you discuss the issue of chapter 5 on faith over breakfast. What are the dangers of portraying Jesus as white? What are the dangers of portraying him as black? What are the benefits of both? Where can we see artistic representation of Jesus in new cultural forms?
Excellent.
Thanks, Rick. Powerful, beautiful question.
Yep.
One that I'm going to have to pray a little bit over and ponder.
Looking forward to diving into that. Yeah,
yes.
Rick, great question. So that is coming up.
Yeah.
And so that's chapter 5 from What We Do with Jesus.
What we do with Jesus.
My little book about the Garden of Gethsemane in Tucson. So yeah, if you haven't read that and you want to prime yourself for this for this podcast, it's on Amazon. It'll ship real fast. What We Do with Jesus, Littleton is my last name. If you pop that in there, it'll pop up faster. But anyway, yeah, we'll get into that.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Rick. Okay, well, see you next time.
All right. You've been listening to Faith Over Breakfast with Pastor Eric Siepen and Pastor Andy Littleton. Please share us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thank you.